Okay, in this video, I'm just going over the answer key to the topic 1.1 assessment training. So for number one, you've seen it on a couple worksheets by now. It's coming up with your own example of irrational times irrational gets you rational. Now that's a special case. There's only certain numbers that can work to get rational. And how you know that is by picking a square root that's not perfect. So, for example, square root of 3. Now, the nice thing about that, if you multiply it by itself, what the calculator does is multiply the inside. So 3 times 3 gets you 9. And then that in turn becomes a perfect square. Square root of 9 becomes 3. So you have to, for letter A, find some irrational number like the square root of 5 times itself, because that's going to get you a perfect square. Because remember, a perfect square means a number times itself um, equals that perfect square. So then we have that 5. Now for part B, this is also a special case dealing with irrational plus an irrational equaling R, which is rational. For this to happen, you need to have a positive irrational number plus the negative irrational, because this is the only situation that cancels out to get you 0. Now, please remember 0 is a rational number. It is a whole number, which means it's an integer, which means it is irrational. For number 2, the work that I'm going to ask you to do is convert to a decimal. So for example, if I want square root of 5, then that's going to get me a decimal. And that's just because you're going to be putting it on a number line. And you're going to do that for all of them. And then you're going to write the smallest. In this case, square root of 5, which converts to about 2.23, which is smaller than 2.4, which is smaller than 8 over 3, because I converted it to that decimal. For number 3, students are having a hard time with putting it in the calculator. So for number 3, it's 3 and 2/3. So you have to hit the plus sign and you have to hit control divide to get that. Now, when the calculator, and our calculator is special, it's going to set up as a fraction. If you get a fraction in the calculator, that's automatically rational. Because the calculator is programmed to give you an integer divided by an integer. Now, of course, if you want to make it a decimal, you can by hitting Control Enter. But for this, I don't recommend it, because some students may say, oh, this is a pattern, but then it's a 7. I'm not sure where that 7 comes from. And you may be second guessing yourself. You may think it's irrational because of that 7, when in fact, all the calculator is doing is rounding up. So please don't let the calculator confuse you. If the calculator gives you 11 over 3, that is known as rational, because it's an integer divided by an integer. Now the square root of 8, you can set up as the fraction first. The square root of 8 is not a perfect square under it. So that's going to ruin it, and that's going to get you a decimal. It's going to get you an irrational decimal, because yes, it goes on forever, but it doesn't repeat. I don't know what comes after that 6. Now B is a little tricky. An integer divided by an integer will always get you rational. However, you see a square root. Square root of 25 really means that this number is 5. 5 is rational over rational, so that's that. And then the calculator automatically gives me negative 7 over 24. So I know for sure that's rational. Same thing with letter C. 16 is a perfect square. if you take a square root, because that signifies as 4. 4 is a counting number, it's a whole number, therefore it is rational. And then lastly, square root of 81, you can simplify as 9. What makes this irrational is that I don't know what comes after that 9. Yes, it goes on forever. That's what the ... means. But I don't know the next digit. And then this is really important because I mentioned this in class today. The calculator is going to try to trick you. But if the calculator gives you a fraction, keep it a fraction. 3 is an integer divided by an integer. That is the definition of a rational number. The reason why the calculator is going to try to trick you is that it looks like there's no pattern here, but there is. The calculator just doesn't show all the digits. So even though you don't know what's next, you do if the calculator could show more numbers. So once again, this is why I really think if you see a fraction to begin with, and that fraction is an integer, which is 3, divided by an integer, it's automatically rational. Same thing if it was negative. -1 is an integer divided by an integer. If you put this whole problem into the calculator together, the output or the answer is going to get you a fraction. It's going to give you -8, which is an integer, divided by 51, which is another integer. So that automatically leads you to a rational. If you put -8 divided by 51 and you find it a decimal, the calculator may mislead you. It's repeating, but the calculator doesn't show enough numbers for you to see it. So if you have any questions about that, make sure you email me by 8 o'clock. I'll put this video on Schoology and on my YouTube channel. Hopefully this helps understand a little bit more. If you do need help, any other questions, like I said, please feel free to email me. Thanks, guys. Bye.